Half a day. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. The Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land, and Justice is now called to order. Today's Monday, May 13. The time is about 1:05 p.m. Notices for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on May 6 and on May 8, 2019. The notice was also published in the Guam Daily Post on May 6 and May 9, 2019. So there are two agenda items for today's hearing. One is the proposed rules and regulations for school building sanitation. The second are the proposed rules and regulations governing public swimming pools. We're going to do that in the reverse order, though, today. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, starting with Senator Kelly Marsh-Titano and Senator Sabina Perez. The first item on the agenda will be the rules and regulations for public swimming pools. We will discuss, the Department of Public Health will testify. These rules were proposed by the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And before we get into the rules themselves, I would just like to very briefly describe the process that we are going through right now. So we're having a public hearing here at the legislature as part of the AAA, or the Administrative Adjudication Law process. In that process, before any rule is adopted, amended, rescinded, or repealed, the agency is responsible for holding a public hearing and publishing notice of that hearing at least 10 days prior to the date of the hearing. At least 5 copies of the rules shall be on file at the agency from the date of publication of said notice continuously until the hearing, and any interested person shall be given an adequate opportunity to examine a copy of said proposed rule or rules. Copies of the rules will also be made available on the website of said agency for public review. The agency proposing the rules and regulations must also include an economic impact statement. This statement must be completed and made available to the public prior to the hearings on the proposed rules. If the economic impact statement or economic impact is estimated to be less than $500,000, then only a preliminary economic impact statement is required. In this case, the Department of Public Health had a hearing on their proposed rules and regulations for swimming pools, and they also included an economic impact statement. So that's all part of the record here that we have before us. Once the agency holds a public hearing on the rules and regs, it must file copies of the proposed rules, economic impact statements, and transcripts of the public hearing with the Governor's Office and the Office of the Attorney General for approval. Upon approval from the Governor and the Attorney General, the agency must send a copy to the Speaker of the Legislature. Proposed rules are referred to the Legislative Committee with oversight of the subject matter, and that committee shall conduct 1 or more public hearings on the proposal within 75 calendar days from the date of filing of the rules of the Speaker. So that's where we are today. We're within the 75 days having our legislative public hearing on those rules that have already received a public hearing at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And a review. They've also received the review from the Attorney General and the Governor. No rule shall be effective until after compliance with the provisions of 5 GCA 9303 and 90 calendar days have elapsed from the date of filing with the Speaker. After the public hearing and the 90 calendar days from the date of filing, the Speaker may certify and the Legislative Secretary attest to the default approval of compliant rules and regulations pursuant to the AAA. The legislature by passage of a bill into law, approve, disapprove, or amend any rule within 90 calendar days from the date of filing with the Speaker. So without any other action from the legislature after this public hearing, these rules and regulations may go into default approval. And the Speaker may certify that everything has complied with the AAA and the time has passed as required by law, that the public hearing was conducted, and so the rules may be deemed approved by default. If we want to amend or reject them, we will have to put in a bill and do that. All right. All right, so now we will begin with, I'd like to recognize the presence of Senator James Moylan. Thank you, Senator, for joining us. And now we will begin with the Department of Public Health. Mr. Nadeau, if you could please come up and will it just be you, or would you like to introduce your team? Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. With me, I have my staff with the Division of Environmental Health. Oh, by the way, my name is Tom Nadeau. I am the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And with me today, I have Ms. Marilu Scroggs. She is the Environmental Public Health Administrator with the Bureau of Inspection Enforcement. And her staff is Ms. Leilani Navarro. She's also an Environmental Public Health Officer, and she actually prepared and developed the rules and regulations. So I'm trusting them that they'll provide me the right information as we go through this hearing. So good afternoon. Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land, and Justice, Senator Therese, Madam Chair, Senator Marsh, Senator Moylan. On behalf of the Department of Public Health and Social Services, I'd like to thank you all for granting the department the opportunity to speak on the proposed rules and regulations for public swimming pools. The our director, Linda Pinco Donorsi, she sends her apology. She was not able to make it today, but of course, we are definitely in support of this proposed regulations. The Division of Environmental Health, otherwise known as DEH, is tasked with regulating public swimming pools pursuant to Title 10 GCA, Chapter 29. Currently, the division is implementing rules and regulations that were adopted in 1980. For safeguarding public health and providing bathers a swimming environment that is safe and conducive to good health. Since its adoption nearly 40 years ago, there have been significant changes in pool safety. DEH has determined that the existing regulations are in need of updating to further protect the health and safety of bathers on Guam. The proposed regulations closely mirrors the Modic Aquatic Health Code, otherwise known as MACH or the MOC, which was developed by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, together with regulators, the aquatic sectors, and academia to assist and encourage all jurisdictions across the nation to adopt a science-based guide in regulating public swimming pools to reduce recreational water illnesses, injuries, and drownings. In the process of developing the final version of the proposed regulations, the department had conducted an economic impact study or survey, and we also presented the initial draft to island stakeholders such as the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, called GHRA. Local realtors that manage several condominium apartments with public swimming pools were also notified, as well as others that operate public pools on Guam. Preliminary comments about the initial draft were received from GHRA during their general membership meeting that was held on September 2018. We then held a public hearing pursuant to the Administrative Adjudication Law on October 18, 2018, where we accepted official comments from the public, specifically GHRA. All the association's concerns were reviewed, and subsequently changes were made to create the final draft. Thus, we believe the final proposed version that is before us today retains the core elements of the MOC, which provides additional safeguards to bathers while addressing the major concerns of local stakeholders. I know there was an email addressed to the director and I seeking a timeline, so I'll just go through that real quickly, how this process came about. So we drafted the regulations in March 2018. We did the economic survey following month, April 2018. We received 70 responses for the economic survey in April. We had a stakeholders meeting on September 2018 with GHRA. Then we held another one with GHRA on October 5th of 2018. In preparation for the public hearing, we did a public notice announcement on September 30th, 2018, and October 4, 2018, to comply with the AAA requirements. We also completed the economic impact statement around in October 2018 as well. The hearing itself was held on October 18th of 2018. And after the hearing and after the revisions were made, we transmitted the final draft to our director, who then transmitted the document to the Attorney General's office and received approval from their office on February 2019. And it was submitted to the governor on March 2019, earlier this year, for his review and approval, or her review, my apology, her review and approval. And upon that, it was transmitted to the legislature on March 26, 2019. Some of the significant changes made to the proposed regulations are installation of barriers and enclosures around new and substantially altered pools to prevent unauthorized entry, especially unsupervised children. In addition, we are requiring diaper changing stations for pools intended to be used by children less than 5 years of age to prevent transmission of waterborne diseases. We are needing to also require that they provide a dedicated chemical storage space to protect bathers and employees. Also requiring the supervision of public pools by qualified operator to ensure the safe operation of these facilities. And the inspection and grading public pools has been clarified and in detail. The complete changes that we made been provided in a document which we provided earlier called Summary of Proposed Changes. Okay, so that's a more comprehensive description of all the changes that, no, I don't want to say changes, the improvement that we made from the existing rules and regulations. The department recognizes that not all pool operators on island will welcome the proposed rules and regulations, whether in whole or in part, because of additional requirements or the new restrictions that may be placed upon them. Such concerns are acknowledged and can be addressed through a variance provision of the proposed regulations. This provision permits businesses to seek amendments or possibly even waivers to certain requirements if they can present an alternative practice that can still provide the necessary protection to the public. However, even with or without the variance provision, the industry will still benefit from the adoption of the proposed rules and regulations. In addition, the compliance inspections performed under the regulation will focus primarily on those practices and conditions that are deemed critical in contributing to recreational water illnesses and pool injuries, and non-critical infractions will be a lesser focus for regulatory actions. Thus, the businesses will be receiving inspection grades that are truly reflective of a sanitary operation. Finally, I'd like to mention again that the revision of the pool regulation is long overdue. The island has progressed and grown tremendously since the current regulations were promulgated nearly 4 decades ago. Swimming is the 4th most popular sport in the United States, according to a survey conducted by the National Sports Goods Association. In fact, more than 50 million people aged 7 years and older swam more than 6 times in 2009. Considering the number of people who like to go swimming annually, it is easy to understand why recreational water illnesses is common. CDC reported that more than 27,000 people got sick and 8 died from recreational water illnesses outbreaks from 2000 to 2014. Interestingly, most of these outbreaks occurred in hotel swimming pools and hot tubs. It is our position that the adoption of the proposed rules and regulations is a positive step in minimizing harm to our people and our visitors from recreational water illnesses, injuries, and drownings. Once again, thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. We are hopeful that our comments today will be supported and the passage of these rules and regulations will occur. Thank you very much. And we are now more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. I'd also at this time like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Clint Magell. Thank you, Senator, for joining us today. If you don't mind, if you could stay for questions, but we have Ms. Mary Rhodes from the GHRA present who would like to testify. We could hear her testimony and maybe ask all of you questions at the same time. Thank you. Ms. Rhodes.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Ms. Rhodes, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Hapde. Buenas, everybody. Thank you again for having me. For the record, my name is Mary Paulino Rhodes. I am the president for the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, and I would like to thank, actually, Public Health. On several occasions, whenever I do provide testimony, we always stress as an industry, and I think just as a community partner in working with the government of Guam, that on so many bills over the last 13 years I've been with GHRA, I've always referred to public health and the work that the individuals here at this table have done over the years. We've always had good examples of how things are done, and I know that I'm usually pointing a lot of those things out, usually when things aren't being done, but there have been on a lot of occasions where we've always pointed out how if we are going to be approaching changes to legislation or changing rules and regulations, there is a process, and that is the AAA process. And in working with Tom and his team, I have to say in 13 years, public health is one of the few agencies that really does the legwork with the AAA process, but also reaches out to the organizations, especially the industry that it truly affects. For the record, I believe before even its initial administrative hearing that Public Health had, which is stated in their letter, Tom and his team has worked with GHRA. We had them as our guest speaker last year. Before the administrative hearing, we had an opportunity for a couple of months to work on the proposed language changes. And we were one of the two, actually both attendees of the administrative hearing were from the industry. So we have given our comments. A lot of it was taken into consideration. One of the major things that we did ask about was with regards to the fencing around the pool, and that as an industry, we generally have business practices that ensures access is monitored, but also controlled. But in addition to just access, there are a lot of things that's done on commercial buildings and properties like hotels where they limit access already with regards to the pool users are primarily guests, not just tourists, but also our residents. But generally they are guests of the hotels, or they're authorized because they have beach access tickets or vouchers that are being used. So we had a major concern with regards to the access, and having a fence around the pools shouldn't be required, because we have so many other ways to control that. And also a lot of the hotels really do train their employees for basic water rescue. And we also have some lifeguards. Not every hotel has lifeguards. So we were actually able to work this one thing out in working with public health, but I know that there were we had provided oral testimony on a lot of other concerns. Some things are still in there, and I have to apologize. I don't have a complete full written testimony as of today, but within the 10 days, we will be submitting that to you as well as to public health for official record, because some things are still in there, like requiring a lifeguard at the end of like the slides, and then also there are some details in here with regards to shower heads every 50 feet. Some of these things don't exist today, and even the requirements of accessing the pool and how to access it after somebody uses the toiletry, the restrooms, what they have to do prior to entering in the pool. A lot of the times the hotels, they all have bathroom facilities near poolside areas, but they also have general showers. But the requirements of the proximity of where they are and how many there are within so many feet, that's going to increase not just space, but cost. And we understand as an industry the concerns. We do know that it's over 40 years old, and there are a lot of other things that should be taken into consideration. I do know that an economic study, if you will, a study was developed regarding through a survey only. So it wasn't like a scientific study, it was still just at least an outreach on behalf of public health And some people did respond with regards to how much it'll cost to make all of these improvements. So they have taken into some consideration of the costs that are involved with all these changes. But I'd like to reserve my comments when we submit written testimony, which will be a compilation of all the additional language changes, revisions, and/or agreements that we have. We're just very grateful, though we've been included in the process since last year, and that they did omit that part regarding the fencing. I do know that going forward, though, they are going to require it of hotels, but there needs to be a waiver process if they're going to be applying for a waiver in the future. But with regards to existing hotels, we appreciate the fact that they've not just lent an ear to us, but they've actually taken strong consideration of what we've had to say, not just with this, but also when they changed the Guam Food Code and some other things we've gone over the years. So I'm really here to say thank you to Tom and his team for always working with us, but to, again, ensure that you do have representation from the industry, but it is very clear for the record that we've been working together with them and notifying our members. Unfortunately, I don't have a complete report as far as all of our comments after this revised version. So just so you know, this is a revised version as of last year's administrative hearing of what was presented at that time. So we just need a little bit more time, but we understand we have 10 days to provide the full comments, and we will do so accordingly. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very refreshing. And I had seen in the packet submitted to the legislature, they put the transcript of the public hearing. So of course the GHRA's input was very clear there. So, so GHRA is making it very clear to us that the rules since that public hearing have been changed, and Tom outlined some of those changes, and that they may still have some concerns regarding some of the changes that were made after the public hearing. All right, well, that's why we're here today. So I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Joe San Augustine. Senator, thank you for being here today. And if I could just ask you, Tom, to explain the preliminary economic impact statement that was attached to the rules and regulations proposal.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, you're seeking a summary of that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, actually, we did incorporate science into it. We took available resources, national standards, national data, and compiled the survey. We're the first to admit we're not economists, but we did obtain whatever resource we can, like I said, from the national level, as well as some information we got through the survey, especially the actual cost that'll be impacting the stakeholders. But I'll let Ms. Leilani Navarro, she actually worked on the survey and gathered the data and prepared the data, so I'll let her speak on that.
Good afternoon, Senators. So the economic impact statement was based on the results of the survey that were sent out to the 107 stakeholders, which are the public swimming pools. And based on their answers to the survey, we calculated the estimated economic impact. We asked them to answer 6 questions, which DH thought would affect in the most, would result in the most financial impact to the swimming pools. So the questions were about barriers and enclosures. And then the second question was about the diaper changing stations. So we asked them if they will be able to meet the requirements for the diaper changing stations, and if they will not be able to meet that requirement, how much did they think that would cost them to come into compliance. The third question was about the provision of a separate chemical storage space, which is away from the equipment room. The third question was about the general maintenance, how much would it cost them to maintain their facility on a yearly basis? And then the other question was about the presence of a qualified operator in the facility. And the sixth question is it encompasses most of the major changes in the regulations. So they provided their cost estimate on how much they thought that would be, how much they would be impacted. So based on our calculations and the answers to the surveys, we estimated that the annual cost to maintain the facilities is about $3 million, which is actually not a new cost to the facility. It's what they have been expending on a yearly basis since the regulations have been in effect, which was in 1980. And then the new provisions or the updated changes in the regulations, which includes the barrier and enclosures, the diaper changing stations, and all the other updated changes, we estimated that the industry would be impacted by about $7 million. But this expense can actually be spread over a 2-year period because we gave them time 2 years to comply with the requirements. Also, I also want to emphasize that the $7 million for the updated changes may actually be less because we provided a variance for the new facilities to, as long as they have alternative safety measures in place to prevent drowning, so they can actually apply for that variance. And if that cost will be eliminated from the calculation, presumably the $7 million will be a lot less. Okay.
That variance for the new facilities, and what about for the existing facilities?
That's actually, the variance would be for new and existing facilities.
New and existing, all right. Okay, that's all my questions.
Okay.
I'm going to open it up for the panel. If Senator Perez, did you need a copy? Yes, it's attached. Okay, we'll make copies of it. It's attached to the communication that was sent down. All right, we'll make a copy. Senator Perez?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today and for all your input throughout the years, I think. I just am curious about the chemical requirements. Are these different from what we currently use right now? The updated chemical requirements, is it currently in place? Are the pools using this currently?
Well, the current regulations actually state certain levels. For example, for chlorine, it's up to, the maximum would be up to 12 parts per minute. But because of the scientific studies done by CDC and which are also recommended in the Model Aquatic Health Code, these chemical limits have been changed. So, for example, the maximum now for free available chlorine would be up to 10 parts per million. So it's just a little change, but it's been there in the current regulations.
Okay.
Actually, the current regulations, there is no maximum. You can, in theory, you could be 10 times higher than what's allowed. So that's one of the issues that we have with our current 40-year-old regulations, and that's being addressed right now through the adoption or the near adoption of the MOC.
Okay, that's good to know. The other thing is saltwater pools. Does the regulations address, in case somebody wants to build a saltwater pool, does the regulations include any of that?
For salt water, no, actually, it's not included in the But we can actually, because the Model Aquatic Health Code didn't say anything about the salt. We used the second edition, so there's actually a third edition already that came out, so we could incorporate that also, but
In the future.
yeah, in the future.
Because of the chemical composition of salt water and fresh water, the standards and requirements will differ greatly.
Okay, okay, great. So the other question is the qualified operator. What are the requirements for that position?
So currently, the division is looking at a training provided by the National Swimming Pool Foundation. So any employee of for example, the hotel can send any of their employees to training, which we as environmental public health officers also undergo. So it's usually a two-day training. And then at the third day, there's an exam that they have to pass to be qualified operator. So
We are proposing that we will create a list of those credentials or certifications that we recognize to deem that individual as a qualified operator. And there's a separate rules and regulations for health certificates, which identifies public swimming pools as one of those establishments requiring a knowledgeable individual. And currently, we're looking at the certified pool operator, which is a nationally recognized certificate or credential, as a credential that qualifies you as a qualified operator. But as if there are others equivalent to that, then we're more happy to review it and add that to the list as well. And also, we're proposing to include that as a part of our health certificate training course. So if they take our training course, they'll get that certification as well. But that's something later in the future than
Did
later.
you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. The training is only offered once a year, and it does include a person who comes from North Carolina, I believe. And so the challenge with that is what we asked for was a train the trainer program, because that's really our model that we try to fit in with whatever regulation is passed through the legislature. Because we're such a small island and we can't afford to send people off island, and we also can't wait once a year for somebody to come in from off island to train. The other issue is the pass-fail rate. Although people may attend the class, there is a challenge with the examination. Some people aren't just good test takers. They may be able to understand the information, but when it comes to passing the exam, it's very difficult. So what we've asked in the past is of other pieces of legislation is that if there's one trainer who's going to be coming to the island regularly, that a train the trainer, but you have to be qualified. There are different kinds of other types of professionals here on island who could possibly teach the course that has experience in it. I know in our engineering and in our safety committees, we've talked about somebody like a certified industrial hygienist who we have a couple here on an island could teach this course, but they'd have to meet all the qualifications that a CPO standardized test has in the States, but be able to offer it here locally. And then one of the things that we've been able to address in getting a pass-fail rate increase, better results, is having assistance with oral examination rather than just the written. So if somebody has a challenge with understanding the information, they can actually be explained a little bit, but without giving the answers, of course. Because for some people, English is not their first language here on Guam. So we're just asking that consideration be made for a train the trainer program and consideration for at least 75% passing grade. And then also for oral examination to be allowed. That's what we do for pesticides, health certificate, like other classes, even the TIPS, the alcohol server license class. So just for those things to be considered. And also, while we're on the subject of the training with a CPO, I think there are some hours required that they have to be there within 4 hours if they're not put on staff regularly. I think that's okay because a lot of people might outsource that just because they're not going to have a person on staff full-time to do this. And I think that's going to be really important, especially with the change in the chemical makeup. I think that's one of the challenges with our pools. One of the comments made was, well, you know, the pools should be blue, not green, and not have different kinds of things sitting in it. And so I think the challenge with maybe non-commercial pools or that are public pools is the regulation in how they treat the pool, and also understanding access and number of users in the pools. So in a hotel property, you have engineers who are always working with, or somebody like an industrial hygienist who understands the science behind the use of the chemicals, coming in contact with number of users in the pool. A lot of the hotels, they anticipate, you know, peak season, low season. They know exactly how many guests are going to be using the pools on a regular basis. So they tend to put all of that into the equation whenever they manage this, and even with the changes in the chemical makeups. But I think that's the other concern with anyone who has a public pool, whether it's a commercial building, like a residential area, is there aren't maybe people who are maintaining it on a regular basis and don't understand the science behind it. And so I think that part we agree, and it's very important, but making sure that there's qualified people handling that here on Guam, I think is extremely important, because you need people who understand the science behind all of the chemical handling and the storage especially, and then in maintaining it as well. And then the other issue was the lifeguard. That's why we have concerns about, right now, lifeguards are only required in certain depths, and there is a section in the bill or in the proposed language about standing water. And so you can have standing water almost anywhere. And so we would like for that to be removed at least, because the standing water, like a wading pool, you don't necessarily need a lifeguard for that. Before, you have to have so many feet to require a lifeguard. The length of a pool as well as the deepness of the pool. So we would like for that to be reconsidered at least, because right now, majority of the hotels do not have lifeguards per se. They have pool attendants who take basic water rescue classes with American Red Cross or other types of organizations. Lifeguards, you have to understand the liability with it too, is that their whole job is to save a life. And so we don't have as many lifeguards, and there is a lifeguard program, and you have to go through American Red Cross for this. But the size and the depth of the pool used to be what mandates the lifeguards. And so we want to make sure that we don't go so extreme where we have to require lifeguards everywhere, because a lifeguard training class is like $400 per person. And so imagine all of those employees who would have to go through that. It would be very, very difficult, and it's probably not even necessary. If you look at the number of fatalities we've had in the hotel, over how many decades has been one. And so we've asked them to reconsider that section and keep the lifeguard requirement the same as the previous language.
Yeah, I think it's important when these training programs, like you said, that there should also be some apprenticeship program, because just because you read a document doesn't make you qualified to deal with the day-to-day operations of a pool. So I think it's really important to have that knowledge base, and engineers definitely are going to be qualified. I mean, if the chemical engineers, if we have more training, more in-depth training, I think the better off we are as far as managing these pools. The other thing that I would like to also focus on is what does it say regarding use of electricity near a pool? Is there anything protecting any guidelines regarding use of electricity near a pool?
Sorry. The Model Aquatic Health Code requires any underwater lighting to be GFCI protected, and they have to meet the National Electric Code guidelines. So that language was included in the proposal.
Yeah, I recently witnessed the STEM competition, and what would you recommend for, because they need electricity to power up some of their equipment. Are there any guidelines that would address that, use of these type of science fairs that use the pool for underwater robotics?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it, the question?
Yes, so in addition to the lighting for the water, underwater lighting, I think it's important to expand those regulations for outside the pool. Because there may be a time where the, electricity is needed, and if there's any guidelines that are addressed using this model code, is there anything in the model code that would address the need, that particular need,
For lighting?
or any kind of use of electrical equipment outside of the pool?
Well, the Model Aquatic Health Code only mentions about the intensity of lighting when during night swimming. So it just indicates, for example, for the deck, there has to be 30 foot candles of illumination. So I'm not quite sure if I'm getting your question, if I'm answering your question.
We could talk later. Yeah.
I do understand the question. You're asking whether there will be, for example, like a power source, an outlet nearby within the premises of the swimming pool. I'll be first to say, I don't know the regulations by heart, line by line. What I do know that current regulations focus on the safety component of it. So like certain, like Leigh has mentioned, they have to meet the standards of the particular,
Electric code.
right, the electrical code. But I've gone through this real quickly, and I don't recall if there's any restrictions or allowances, for that matter, of outlets nearby. But I do know that it has to meet some, like the standards based on the electrical code as to whether they'll allow it or not. So there's some areas that may be beyond the scope of the current regulations, more for like probably under DPW and their standards for electrical wiring of the like. So I don't think this is explicitly addressed in this regulations, Senator. But I'm more than happy to go through it. If I find something, I'll definitely forward you an email or something to that.
Yeah, I think it's important to assess the surroundings for any kind of hazards. And of course, it's not going to be always obvious every day because certain things are more seasonal. So I think it's important to address these potential hazards in the rules. If not in the rules, then at least have some, postings when the event occurs. In your surveys, did you work closely with the public pools as far as the Ganya pool and Dedito pool? Did you get a lot of input from them?
Well, we did submit sent out the surveys to the community pools, but they actually didn't send a reply. So their input was not included in the economic impact statement calculation.
They were invited to our stakeholders meetings and to our public hearing. They did not participate.
I think that's pretty critical before we, set these rules in stone. I think it's really important to get their input. Yes, thank you.
If I may just say, the director of the Department of Parks and Rec was here earlier. He had another engagement he had to get to, but he says that he is going to assess his pool for compliance with these rules and work with public health and give us both, I guess, a report on what it would take to bring them into compliance and hopefully issue an RFP if that's necessary. All right, Senator Rigel, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to be clear on something from GHRA. So with regards to the proposed economic impact, which is about 7.9 million, is this something GHRA is confident the, hotel association, hotels that have pools will be able to absorb this amount, or is it going to result in passing on cost to customers, or what is GHRA's take on the proposed economic impact?
Well, as I previously stated, this is an underestimated amount because this is not a scientific study. This is based off of information received of those who responded, right? So it's not complete, it's not comprehensive. And it doesn't also take like a scientific sample of how many pools total on Guam. Let's say there's 300 pools and maybe 60% of them responded. I don't know all the specific data with that, and I'm sure the team would be able to answer that. But I can say that there were some questions that also weren't included in the study that will increase cost, that they would like to add as well. So for like the section of decks and walkways, or even the above storage tanks, because of the additional regulations, and that's why I would put just a cautionary flag that even the summary of what's changed to the rules, you really have to do a comparison of the previous language with this new one, because there are some areas that's not really highlighted in bullet points as the changes, but there are minor changes throughout the document that will increase the costs. So like I said, there are things that are maybe not part of the study, where it's the resurfacing of the pool, where the pool has to be completely drained, and how many times you would have to do that, not just for resurfacing or any construction, but also the requirement for markers if you don't have markers to begin with. You have to remember a lot of the pools, the construction, whether it's an apartment building, a commercial complex, or a hotel, a lot of those buildings are from 1970s. And so they may not have those things in there. So you're talking every pool has to be redone if it's going to include markers and even the stairs, landing areas, decks. These are all maybe minor things throughout the document, but it's going to impact the entire surface area. And so with that surface area, you're going to have to drain it. And if you have your act together to make sure construction's all done at one time to complete the code, to be in compliance with the code, then you're only going to drain it once. But if in case you get inspected and there are additional things, then you're going to have to drain it again. And so, and then also the chemical makeup and the testing of that on a regular basis. So pools in general are expensive. That's why not a lot of us have them at our homes. But when you're talking about such a monumental impact, which we understand is important, but because it hasn't changed in 40 years, I think that the study itself is underestimated. And I know that they did send it out several times, and like they stated, even, you know, our government didn't even respond to our government agency with regards to this. So it's completely underestimated. And to answer your original question, are we ready for this type of change? I think that most businesses will tell you probably not, because you know, when you're setting budget, this is budget period right now, even for just GovGuam in June for next year. These kinds of capital expenses have to be planned out over a period of time. And so depending on when this would take effect would determine how soon everybody can come into compliance. And so, as I might want to remind you too, is with construction, it's very difficult to get workers today. And I know a lot's being done regarding the H-2B worker issue with regards to us being, you know, not bringing from the Philippines or even China. So construction's going to be more expensive than probably even estimated if they even responded. And then second, getting the timeline to get these completed so we fall into code. So I think that we need to have a longer timeline to come into compliance with this. And we understand the intent of this, but there are a lot of moving parts with regards to costs and the time to get all of this done. You know, we have a new hotel that's being built with Tsubaki Tower, and that's had how many, you know, new completion dates, and the same thing with Dusitani, that took a long time. So a lot of things can happen, but we do need to take in consideration time and materials, costs, and the impact to the businesses as well during this period, which is why I think that either it needs to be reassessed for a more complete picture now that we're really strongly, now that it's past administrative public hearing to a legislative public hearing, maybe we need that time to do a more complete assessment of the industry now that everybody knows that this has been passed through the AG's office and passed through the governor's office already for blessing to come here. And so I hope that next time there are more people who come out in support and to work together with public health if they are going to consider all of these changes.
Does the GHRA have any estimate of
Do we have any
potential
what?
costs, economic impact?
No, we sent out their survey. So, and we don't have the raw data for that. You know, we follow what public health has. So no, we haven't had time to put that together. That would be you know, we like to work with the agency as much as possible, so I would like to say that we reissue the survey and maybe add a few questions that weren't in the original survey, and we resend that out as we're considering these changes.
There's also a comment here on one of the documents I was reading in the file here. Something to do with one of the comments I believe received on the requirement for the fencing is that it obstructs the view kind of thing. Was that a comment from the GHRA?
We had several comments. One was obstruction, but a lot of it was even safety, even a fence or any kind of fence. The requirement initially was a chain link fence. And so, of course, aesthetics was one thing, but even an obstruction of view to see clearly in could cause a hazard for, you know, even employees to get to a drowning victim or a victim who, or a guest who may be having a trouble in the water. So anything that creates a barrier, that's why they're called barriers, right? So we had major concerns about it, but that was one thing that they actually heard us clearly on. I believe that they are willing to, they want to remove that on there except for any new construction. And the new construction has to be 60% over the commercial value of the property, I believe. Tom?
Specific to the, excuse me, just on. Initial proposal was there be a 6-foot barrier. It doesn't have to be a fence, a barrier of some kind. We believe that was initially, well, we still do it to a certain extent, necessary to protect unsupervised swimmers, especially like children, toddlers, who may enter without supervision. But we did discuss this matter with GHRA, and we asked them, so what do you propose? I mean, what's a counter proposal? And they made some suggestions, which we did incorporate based on what they do now.
That's like the 24-hour surveillance,
Correct.
security guard, or
Correct.
security on
Right.
on the premise.
That's correct.
Those things that would allow for a variance.
Yes.
That's because of the discussion you had with GHRA.
Yes, that's correct.
I also noticed that the barrier requirement is actually one of the largest estimated costs in your economic impact analysis. It's like 3-point-something million, right?
That's correct.
Out of the 7.9. So,
Yes. Well, by the way, by the survey, we try to do a census survey, meaning get everyone's response, because we figured it's a small, Guam being a smaller island, small jurisdiction, we'll get the response of everyone. And even if we didn't, we figured we'd get at least like, we're being optimistic, around 90%, but we did not. So we did a sampling, which is not uncommon for any survey. In fact, a lot of surveys are done sampling because you can't get 100% response. So based on that figure, we did calculation to the representative sample, and we believe, in fact, we were very liberal in the amount that we used. We took the high end of their estimate. Remember, this is our figure provided by those who complete a survey. So we suspect they probably added, we're guessing, because they tend to take the higher end of the range that we offered them to select. And we were very liberal. We took the higher end of the cost and did a calculation on that. So I'm not sure if the cost is going to be more. In fact, I thought we were being extremely liberal, so cost may actually be less. And ultimately, our position has been, we believe the benefit outweighs the cost. Now, we never said this is not going to be costly. We acknowledge that. But a lot of these costs are something that they require for maintenance of pool anyway, something that's being implemented currently. So the survey wasn't simply, the main focus of the survey was on 4 or 5 items that we thought would be that really high price ticket requirement, if you will. And you're right, Senator, barrier was one of them, followed by just coming into compliance altogether, which is a one-time cost. So we don't deny that there'll be definitely cost involved. I believe we addressed the most expensive item, like the barriers. So we're confident that the impact will be something the industry can absorb and for the benefit of their customers and visitors.
Do you believe the barrier is absolutely necessary?
The mock, which was developed by CDC and the from other jurisdictions, the aquatics experts in academia, they put it in because they thought it was worthy of putting it in. Now, they mentioned aesthetic. We're looking at from the safety perspective. Drowning is a concern, or near drownings. I know we had some near drownings on island. I thought it was something we should pursue, which we did. So we kind of found a balance and all that, a compromise, if you will. But it'll still be required if you do not meet the alternative solution. So it's there, it's required, but if you meet the alternative, then they'll able to obtain the permit to operate a swimming pool.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Marsh Taitzina?
Hafaday, and thank you for being here. It's important to hear this testimony from the different sides because we do need to take into consideration all of it and try to come up with the best balance. So I have a few questions. So I was reading through the section in the report about statistics for recreational water illnesses, injuries, and deaths. And it seems, at least in the economic impact portion, that there is a lot of reliance on national rates, but I didn't see any for local understandings. Are there any local understandings of our rates of water illnesses, injuries, and deaths for Guam?
We actually tried to ask from, for example, the statistics from the emergency room of Guam Memorial Hospital. We also tried to work with our epidemiologist for any data, for example, on cryptosporidiosis, but unfortunately, there's no local data available, so the best thing that we could do was to get national data and then translate it into local data, try to calculate based from the national.
Senator, I'd like to add, we're not certain that the disease doesn't occur on island. It simply means the data doesn't exist, so we don't really know. It's possible that they don't routinely, similar to foodborne illness, it's not routinely tested, I suspect, at the emergency room. It might just simply not chalked off as an illness, waterborne illness, if at all. We really don't have a hardcore data, local data, so we have to rely on national data.
With that, it is helpful to look, for lack of having anything here, to look at what's going on in the nation. What would it take, or what do you see that would actually allow you to be able to gather some of these statistics? I think they are really important for understanding if we have a higher or lower rate. I mean, if we have much lower rates than the national average, this might be telling us that we're doing something positive. If we have much higher rates, perhaps because we're around water-based activities a lot more often, that might inform us elsewhere as, otherwise as well. So what would it take, do you think, for us to be able to start getting those statistics to have an informed set of decisions?
A valid question, Senator. I think first, and it's not just, I don't believe it's just a problem relating to waterborne illness. I think there's particularly foodborne illness, which we're quite familiar with. It's not uncommon for an individual to report sick to an emergency room or to a clinic, and they're not simply tested for any or the cause of their illness. It might simply just noted as like a gastrointestinal illness or waterborne illness, if at all, or some other illnesses. To get confirmation, of course, you need sample and to be tested, and that costs money. Ideally, public health should be the entity to test such things. Our lab does not have that capability. But there is a provision in our current regulations, the proposed regulations there, it's on page 66, where we are requiring that injuries and illnesses be reported. But once again, it has to be reported. And if it's anything like foodborne illness, if people don't, unless they're really sick, they don't go to the emergency room or get treatment. They just accept it as part of life, if you will. I know for a fact that many of us, well, including myself, we've gotten ill with a illness of some kind, but if it was not enough to make us sick, we don't go, so thus it's not reported, and thus it's not tested as well. So I don't know what it'll take, but I do know that we need better data, we need more data, but getting that may be difficult because it involves ultimately money, because they have to be tested.
I just would like to add, this is the part, other than the barriers and the fencing, this was the other piece that we were strenuously against. Because to use national data and not have local data, and to make such a clean sweep, drastic change on the regulations on swimming pools, I think is, some areas I think are overreaching, especially when we have a lack of data, just the cost to get the data, but also there's no initiative to really try to collect that data. We understand foodborne illness because there's, there are things that, there are sanitary requirements with regards to handling and serving food. But already, that's what the whole point of having chemicals in the pool is for, is to help balance that out. And so we understand the chemical aspect. But if I could just point you out to sections like page 48 throughout on the hygiene facility, this area is really far-reaching with regards to how many water stations you need to have. So if you urinate outside the pool in a restroom facility, you need to go through a rinse station, a wash station, and you need to do certain things. And who's going to monitor that? How many stations have to be built every 50 feet with shower heads, 4 shower heads for every 50 feet? It's just, it seems to be too much. And this is the area we've asked them to taper back because it really seems unnecessary. There are a lot of things I think that we as hotels, and what's always hard is that it's like preaching to the choir whenever they tell us things, because a lot of times we're already doing those things internally within the operations. There are always good businesses and bad businesses, but there are a lot of places who don't have the personnel that we have, like in a hotel, to monitor all these things or to secure access or limit access and have surveillance and security, and already the pools, most of them close by 9 p.m. anyway, or even 8 p.m. at night. So we have a lot of things that exist in the hotels, whereas and that's the challenge public health has, I have to say, is they can't think of just the tourism industry and just hotels. They have to think about all other types of facilities that have pools. So that's where I would ask each of you to consider is maybe there should be a different set of rules similar to the barriers. Is if they already have set standard operating procedures and a facility has these things, maybe they don't have to have all of these things in place because already they have the protocols and the staffing and the facility itself that does as much as possible to ensure safety and security and cleanliness in the facilities with regular housekeeping and all of that. But there are so many things in here with regards to personal hygiene, having a hygiene facility, number of instruments used, and even the processes in how somebody has to clean themselves before entering every time. It seems to be too much. And the question then I guess begs back to public health is who's going to monitor all of this anyway? And that's the problem we have here on Guam with every agency, is everybody has these good intentions to introduce laws, but who's going to monitor and enforce all of these laws? Some of these things are just really unnecessary. We could probably come up with some really good basic things that everybody has to have, but these items listed in 48 through, it's just, to me, just a lot to ask for when already you're updating the chemical makeups, what can be used, how you're going to dispose of it, what kind of storage tanks. You know, that all impacts the environment, that impacts the people, that impacts your facilities and your employees. That's really what we should be concerned about, not just from public health, EPA, OSHA, all of that. That's what really the government is supposed to do. Telling us how to rinse off before how we enter a pool and afterwards, I think that already is going to be too much, and that's the whole purpose of chemicals in a pool, is to help balance that out. So nobody has staffing to do that at a poolside. One of the things that they require too is for every pool. So have you guys been to the hotels? Not just here on Guam, but anywhere. Some places have 3 or 4 pool sides. And to require that at every separate pool, so it has to be replicated 4 times, that's a lot. And so that's why we're asking to taper this section back and be very reasonable about what they're asking the community to do. Because similar to what we did with the Guam Food Code with the same team is, we said, you know, before you go out and increase the fees where we needed to inspect 4 times a year, the mandate is once a year. And so we were able to work with them on that, and they've been doing a good job to try to do the once a year now. But they weren't ready to do inspections 4 times a year. So let's do a baby step in between here and be more reasonable and stick to the basics of what pool management really is, which is chemical makeup, maintenance, and the security of it with the chemical storage and how they handle it in between. All of these extra things, which I will provide that list to you. It is in our oral testimony during that public administration hearing. We're asking that you strongly consider removing that language from this bill, because we can only control what we do as individuals before we access anything. And I think for the most part, though, when people are accessing pools, a lot of this just seems to be quite extravagant as far as a request from not just the consumer, but also from the facility itself and the employees who have to manage and monitor this all the time.
May I rebut, if I may? As an environmental health practitioner, as an environmental health division, our mission is to prevent before an injury occurs. Granted, maybe we don't have the data, or maybe the incidence of some of these waterborne illness doesn't exist on Guam, or it's very low. But our job is to prevent before it happens. So enforcing or adopting and then enforcing these provisions are doing just that, is to prevent an illness from occurring, from someone getting hurt, or God forbid, someone dying from it. And Mary is correct. There are good actors and bad actors. I mean, they're fortunate. They may have the funds, or they may have the interest to implement some or all of these requirements because they have vested interest in what they do, or while others may not. And regulation is part of that process in preventing illnesses from occurring, and also having a standard where they can follow so they don't have to rely on public health. We can't be everything for everyone in our division. In fact, we're doing a horrible job of inspecting health-regulated establishments, including swimming pools. In fact, 77%, in our last review, May 2018, close to like 70% of the swimming pools on island have been inspected in like 5 or more years. We're doing a horrible job. So I think having strong regulations, will help somewhat offset that. Now, we definitely need to do a better job, but that requires money, funding to have more inspectors. But also, I think it's having the regulations that are good, that are that when followed can prevent outbreaks, is worth the effort of adopting. And there is a variance provision that still exists. They may seek variance, and we're more than happy to entertain all requests. If they can provide an alternative solution or can justify what they do or don't do will prevent illnesses, we're all for it. That's why we created a variance provision. And also, chemical, in order for chemical to work, like free chlorine, you have to ensure there's no additional contaminants in the water. And also, that means you have to bathe, rinse off before you enter the water and rinse off, or whatever you need to do to protect oneself. And you're right, you can't enforce some of these people to wash before they enter the water, but having the opportunity, having the resource to do so will be a positive step, making that happen. And that's what we're doing. We're asking them to provide these additional facility or additional sinks or additional shower heads so they can do that. It's like hand washing. We can't watch and enforce hand washing, but if the sink's not there, it's not going to matter. In this case, we're asking them to provide the necessary additional resources to help make it happen. Thank you.
So, Juice Masi, I think that was some useful discussion. Now, I'm not making a stance one way or the other, but I couldn't help but think as some of the discussion was going on about the rinsing and those sort of facilities being there of, and I have not read through all the rules and regulations, but if there are any deterrent measures for just urinating in the pool. So, yeah, that came across my mind, and I know that there are ways of dealing with that, partly through chemicals, partly through being able to have, I believe, something in the water that can make it actually detectable. Because a lot of this, and again, I'm not arguing against it, but a lot of this might be moot to a degree if we're ensuring certain things, but other things may be occurring. But what I really wanted to get to is there any understanding that you have on your part the percentage of states and territories that have implemented the model aquatic health code in the state that it now stands, as it currently stands? Do you understand trends in the tendency for states and territories to be adopting these codes? So have you looked at what areas that are perhaps similar to us, what elements of it they have drawn from and find practical, and what elements they maybe haven't, and in the ways that they've balanced these model aquatic health codes?
As of the last time I checked, which was early part of this year, there's actually 8 states in the British of Columbia that adopted the Model Aquatic Health Code, and then there's, I believe, I don't have the exact figure, but more than about 10 or 20 states are in the process of adopting it, but of course, they have to go through the legal process also, so it's taking them some time. And one of the first states that adopted the Model Aquatic Health Code was New Jersey. So I was fortunate enough to be in a table with the person who worked to adopt the Model Aquatic Health Code in New Jersey, so we were able to compare notes on how do we address, for example, facilities that would be opposed to certain requirements. So I did take note of that. Also, Colorado was in the process of adopting it, so we also shared notes on how to go about the process of making sure that the stakeholders' input are considered into the regulations. So the model, I just have to, if I may, emphasize, I'm sorry, that the standards set by the Model Aquatic Health Code are just the minimum standards. So based on the scientific studies, these are the minimum requirements that would prevent recreational water illnesses, injuries, and drownings. So even because we have an old regulations, and then this new code is coming to Guam, it may seem that it's a bit stricter, but again, these are just the minimum standards that were produced based on research and studies. Thank you.
And I have a couple of questions about understanding the economic impact. So the prediction is that it may be about $7 million or more for the entire set of facilities here on island, is my understanding. So it listed that per facility, it was estimated to cost about $3,086 a month per facility. Is there any breakdown in the difference between understanding what I'm assuming would be a higher cost for hotels that have larger facilities and more pools, and an understanding of what this would mean for an apartment building? Or are you thinking that the apartment building would also have a predicted cost of about $3,000 extra a month? That's on page 17 of 20 of the economic study.
Senator, we gave a range to select, and where appropriate, we have to give an actual figure. So within the range, we took the higher end. Like I said, we're trying to be liberal in our calculation. And if you look at page 9, we did break it down by type, like who responded, and did a breakdown based on that. So we believe we got a well-representative sample from all different types of the establishments that have swimming pools. It's not as Mary mentioned, it's not a census survey, so we don't have response for everyone, but we believe we got a fairly good representative. And so we did our best by being liberal and taking the higher end of the cost and did a calculation based on that. So I think the page, as I mentioned, page 9 and 10 kind of helps in that determination how much it costs from which particular type of swimming pools.
Okay, I'll be looking further at that so that I can better understand it. In the economic study, I saw the section where it was working to understand how some of the economic burden would be potentially offset. Was there any examination of insurance rates, changes in insurance rates for having increased safety measures? Is there thought that there would be a difference in insurance rates?
That was not
due to
included.
this?
That was not included in our study, ma'am.
Does anybody, including the Hotel and Restaurants Association, know? Okay, and so having dealt with other safety measures, that may be something that's important as well and may help ease the burden. I can't guarantee that that's going to come into play at all, but it's important to look at and understand.
I worked in the insurance industry for 12 years, and I can honestly say that even with economic data there, you'd have to talk to a P&C insurance agent, but if we don't have data of claims and incidences here on island with regards to this, it's not going to affect rates at all.
Thank you. Senator, are you? Thank you very much. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, my questions were answered by Tom pretty honestly about the compliance of inspections, so thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Sadagasti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, I noticed that I'm looking at your economic report, and it talks about most of the rules and regulations have been in effect for 38 years, correct?
That's correct.
38 years. That's a long time.
Yes, sir.
Has everybody, when they first open up and build their pools, met the requirements?
I wasn't around that long, but I'm guessing they were, sir, because they have center permits. And when we did do the inspections, they weren't well, in order to have a center permit, they have met the requirements. So I presume those that have center permit have always met the requirements. Now, whether they remain compliant, we haven't done enough inspections to say so, but the fact that they had center permit from the very beginning tells me that they had met the requirements initially, and now it's just a matter of maintaining it. And granted, it's 40 years old. What we're surprised is when we compare the mock to the regulations, as Leilani mentioned, it actually wasn't that big of a difference. I mean, granted, there's some handful of requirements that's not addressed, but those weren't like major, except for the barriers, major requirements and differences in requirements. So our rules and regulations are actually not that bad, but it just needed some additional requirements to bring it up to standards that the mock has created. So to answer your question, I'm sorry. Yes, my understanding is all the pools, when they obtain the center permit, or even now, they have to meet the requirements of the current regulations.
Okay, and as you're identifying it in your economic statement, maybe up to 2 years to be in full compliance if these rules were passed, correct?
We are suggesting that 2 years be granted to allow them to transition into the new requirements, yes.
Why not longer?
We could. Just that after 40 years, but that's maybe around 40 years too long. So add this 2 years. I mean, in theory, yes, we can do another 3 years, 5 years.
I'm not going to play with those years because I'm going to ask you then, how many years you been there and what have you been doing?
How long been with the division?
And how long have you
27
been doing
years.
inspection? You've been there a long time, Tom.
Yes, I
Okay,
have.
so I'm going to leave that alone. All I'm asking for is to allow enough time for everybody to be in compliance so that either instead of the 2 years that maybe GHRA is barking about and about the cost and all these excuses, at the end of the day, I like that statement. It's about prevention. We're not going to wait until somebody drowns or somebody gets sick because somebody didn't, like you said, put a shower head out there. It's not going to cost that much. Most hotels have it. They'll put a little sign when you're leaving the bathroom, the restroom. Please shower before you enter the pool. If they don't, they don't.
Absolutely.
But if they do, they help the prevention.
Absolutely.
And we have to admit it that we know that most people, when they see something that don't look right, the color is not right in the pool, they won't even go in the pool. They'll go look for another pool. They see something floating, they won't even go in, or they'll get out of the pool, right?
Absolutely.
So on the prevention, I like the prevention side, but I like to also make sure that there's a lot of room for the hotels and everybody else to prepare for it. So, and the reason why I say maybe a little bit beyond 2 is so there's no more excuses. You be in compliance and you've got to systematically be in compliance. In other words, when you want to talk about, I guess, the lighting that one of my colleagues brought up, it's in the law today already. It's currently on the regulations. I noticed that on your update, you were talking about additional lighting. But I'm only looking at the certain things that they should be able to be in compliance instantly. It shouldn't cost a lot of money. A lot of the hotels today are upgrading a lot of their stuff. I know what Ms. Rhodes talking about the budget. The hotels can budget a little bit more just to add like a shower head, maybe improve their barriers, because in some of the pools there's no barriers at all.
That's correct.
And when she brought up, have you been to the pools in the States? Yes, I have. I've been to quite a few of them. And even on some of the hotels, they put down there, swim at your risk. And there is a 6-foot fence. It's at all the Motel 6. Okay? So I know there are a lot of compliance out there. I'm just concerned that you've got a model. You've got 8 states that are 8 plus 1 country, and hopefully 10 will follow out of 54 states and territories. That's a very slim number. I think we need to take a look at it and just maybe check out your survey a little bit, work with the industry out there. But I do believe in the prevention. I do support that 100%. If it's about preventing somebody getting sick, somebody dying, then we do what we need to do. That's what we're supposed to do. And I have nothing else further, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, the 2 years was somewhat arbitrary. I mean, we could have said 3, 4 years. I mean, we just thought 2 was an ideal number. But Department of Public Health, we're open to 3 years. As long as it's adopted, we're all for it.
All right, that was going to be my question also about the 2 years versus another time period. And if you could just maybe summarize for us, so there's objection, of course, to the costs. You've made some estimates on the costs, not perfect estimates, but a kind of a survey across, and you know the number of pools we're talking about. And this is a one-time cost, it looks like, to put additional facilities in place to prevent disease. So do you, I mean, now you're talking to the legislature that pretty much this is on a default approval track unless we make some changes. So what is your bottom line pretty much? Do you really think it's that important to do this to prevent disease on Guam in particular, and that to impose this cost on hotels and on our public swimming pool facilities?
Absolutely,
You're our experts that we're looking to in the government to tell us, please.
Absolutely, Senator. We believe we take the motto of prevention very seriously. And, you know, I hate to use cliche, the old the announced prevention is worth 1,000 cures, is worth 1,000, I'm sorry, announced prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I really believe that. I mean, we have data, I'm not sure if it was for this particular data, but a single illness can thousands of dollars aside from the pain and suffering the individuals suffer. So, you know, I think 40 years is a bit long. I mean, I think it's due for a revision, and the cost is a one-time cost. Government, we're notorious for being responsive, so I like to think we're being proactive before someone gets hurt or someone dies. I would hate to put price on injuries and death, but sometimes that's what it comes down to when we do economic statement, impact studies. So I believe, based on our research, the benefits outweigh the costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we will close this part of the hearing today, and we will move on to our second agenda item. But I would like to thank you very much, Ms. Rhodes from GHRA, for your continued input into these rulemaking process for the swimming pools. We now have, we're going to move on to the other item on the agenda, which is rules regarding sanitation at schools. School building sanitation. Yes. So thank you very much. For the panel of senators, DOE has submitted written testimony, but they said they would not be here today. They are requesting a little bit more time to get together with Public Health on this. In the meantime, we will have a presentation by Public Health. Mr. Nadeau, whenever you are ready, please proceed.
Thank you. If I could just organize my notes here, excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to repeat a lot of things, the introduction, so I apologize in advance. So Hafaday, Madam Chair, members of the Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land, and Justice. My name is Tom Nadeau. I am the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Division of Environmental Health of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. With me today is Ms. Mary Lou Scroggs and Ms. Leilani Navarro. They're both Environmental Health Officers, Environmental Public Health Officers with the Division of Environmental Health. On behalf of my director, Ms. Linda Pinco Donorsi. I would like to thank you all for giving our department the opportunity to speak on the proposed rules and regulations for school building sanitation, which our office had developed pursuant to the AAA. We are obviously in support of the proposed rules and regulations for school building sanitation. The Division of Environmental Health, otherwise known as DEH, currently regulates all public and private schools through the existing rules and regulations of Article 7, Title 26, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations, which was adopted in 1984. Since its adoption 36 years ago, DEH has conducted many inspections of Guam schools, especially public school system administered by the Department of Education during the period of the GPSS Health and Safety Task Force, otherwise known as the AG School Task Force, in 2008, and during the existence of the Office of the Adequate Education Surahanu in 2009. During the course of conducting these compliance inspections, it became evident to our division that the regulations needed to be updated, which eventually led to the development of the proposed regulation that is being discussed today. As mandated by the AAA, this department held a public hearing on March 9, 2017, to obtain input from the community on the proposal. Major stakeholders such as Guam Department of Education, Catholic Schools of Guam, Guam Community College, and University of Guam were all notified of the hearing. Even prior to the public hearing, DEH held multiple stakeholders meetings in January and February of 2013. Thus, several inputs and comments were received in review before the current version was prepared and finalized and submitted. Although the Department of Public Health has made substantial changes from the existing school building regulations, many of these amendments are mostly to expand or clarify requirements already being implemented and enforced. Thus, much of the standards in existing regulations have been retained. The major changes include requirements related to playground, standards for temperature and ventilation and humidity, and the increase in the number of hand washing units and toilet facilities. For example, existing regulations require that a minimum of 5,000 square feet be provided regardless of the size of the school and student population. The proposed regulation will be requiring at least 100 square feet of accessible space per student, and thus it takes into account the number of students enrolled in each school. Second, existing regulations require adequate ventilation, but it does not define or explain what exactly that entails. The proposed regulations, on the other hand, provide actual ventilation standard using a nationally recognized criterion, and the same is done for relative humidity. The department also proposed to increase the light intensity requirement in classrooms and other areas of schools. Room temperature is not addressed in existing regulation. Thus, we inserted a standard for that as well. The ratio for number of students to hand washing unit currently is 60:1, and 100:1 for elementary schools and secondary schools respectively for the existing regulations. The proposal seeks to update that to 50:1 ratio for all grade levels, including colleges and universities, which are not addressed in the current regulations, and which is also be consistent with the standard for International Plumbing Code, which Guam has adopted. The ratio for number of urinals are also adopted to reflect the IPC. The public health reasoning for these and other revisions, along with other requirements in the proposal, are provided in Annex 1 of the proposed regulations, known as the public health reasoning. With the hopeful adoption of the proposed regulations, public health seeks to require all island schools at all levels, both private and public schools, to maintain standards that ensure safe, helpful, and comfortable learning environment for our children and our adult students. Once again, we thank the committee and chair for listening to our testimony. Danklu na Sizu Usmasi.
Situ Usmasi. Can I just ask you, in DOE's initial testimony on March 30, 2017, they indicated that Section 4705H, requiring adherence to adopted plumbing, building, and fire regulatory codes, contradicts 21 GCA Chapter 67 and 66. Can you comment on that?
I don't.
So I think their point was the 2009 International Plumbing Code, which we used as the standard for the number of toilet facilities. And then they referred to the real property chapter of the GCA, which said that these codes or the requirements of the International Plumbing Code shall only be required of facilities that have been newly built or that are substantially altered, meaning more than 50% of the cost of the facility is expected to be expended for that renovation. So we actually, we didn't, we believe that's actually the Department of Public Works purview. So we're looking at the health and safety aspect of the health benefits of having enough toilet facilities and hand washing sinks. And because Guam has adopted the 2000 International Plumbing Code, that's what we are proposing to adopt as well.
Okay. And
We simply want to ensure that we have a uniform regulations, what's already being enforced. The International Plumbing Code is a standard that's already been adopted and enforced, so we figure we'll just adopt that as well, since it's what's required of all facilities anyway.
all right. What about, okay, then can you also talk about the fiscal impact? This one gives 5 years, 5-year requirement to come into compliance.
Yes.
Could you please describe the fiscal impact that you've estimated?
Okay, so these regulations, actually, we provided enough time for, especially for the public school system, which we know is, budget strapped as well. So we gave them 5 years to comply with the requirements of these regulations. And based on so the total cost of complying with the regulations is, based on the answers to the surveys, about $4 million. This is to comply with the changes to the regulations. So if this cost is divided into the 5-year implementation period, the daily cost to make these changes would be about $4, which we think would not have much effect on the students or even the parents.
If I may add, a lot of these requirements are actually being enforced. We're just kind of expanding, clarifying the requirements, going back like the adequate ventilation. When we first started enforcing this, or when we first routinely started enforcing this, and currently as well, we have to use temperature as a kind of a guide to indirectly determine adequate ventilation. So what we've done in these regulations are clarify and expand and actually establish a standard. And GDOE, when they do comply, are able to meet the standards. So these standards are not actually new to them. In fact, it's been enforced and they've complied with it. The challenge that they have is maintaining the compliance. So granted, this will cost money, but it's not a money that they weren't already anticipating or implementing or expending right now as well. So it's not just GDOE, but we're looking at the other schools as well, the private schools, which we haven't been inspecting as much as GDOE. And one of the primary reasons is because they haven't been challenged as much as GDOE. And we found that they're actually able to comply rather quickly, the private schools that is, compared to GDOE.
Do you believe that the concerns that these rules and regs address are very urgent?
One of the things we've done to these regulations is to, in the past, when the task force was in place, when the Surhanu was implemented, we were criticized how they claimed that school was so easily closed. And I can understand why. I recall an article how, I think it was Simon Sanchez, they're supposedly closed because of a damaged baseboard or something. I mean, they're correct to a certain extent, but this is one of several violations that we found through the years or the course of inspections. And it can be seemed as if it's easy to close a school. And in a sense, it can be. You look hard enough, you find all violations. But we try to do the risk-based inspections. So those focus on true violations that have true, that could cause harm to the students and the occupants of the building. So our current regulations, our inspection report have been developed where it's risk-based. In other words, we focus on those that have true impact to the health and safety of the population and take the necessary appropriate measures based on that, as opposed to just simply giving them a closure because of the number of peeling paint, if you will. So we're trying to find that balance while we're trying to be a regulatory agency while understanding the importance of some of these requirements and the violation that can result from it. So it's a risk-based inspection that we plan to do based on these regulations and based on how our rules and regulations, based on our inspection reports are prepared. I'm not quite sure if I quite answered your question, Chair, but are they in urgent need of a, well, you know, I've always said, going back to Senator San Augustine said, prevention is the key, right? We haven't done school inspections for some time. In fact, in the past several years, we've been attempting to implement a community-based, call it community-supported school maintenance pilot program, which we work with GDOE, and didn't quite work out as we planned. But one thing we found out from this is that when push comes to shove, GDOE is able to comply and meet the requirements, but it's a matter of committing resources and time and effort into it. And I'm not denying GDOE is strapped budgetarily, as all agencies are. And a lot of schools are old, no denying that. So okay, going back to the question. It's not that I'm trying to skirt the question or anything, but we've done several inspections. And I can tell you, almost every inspection could result in the closure because there's so many violations that we find, that we observe. And some are critical and some are not. But you add them in totality, yes, they constitute a closure in terms of number of violations that we find. So we're trying to address that, find a balance by having a regulations and an inspection report that addresses that. So it's focused on high risk and minimize the non-critical violations. I think schools, as well as all other facilities, such as swimming pools, need to be inspected frequently to ensure that they maintain compliance. And that's the challenge. We go in, we do inspection, find the violations, they correct it. We come back 2-3 years later, same problems, because the routine compliance, routine enforcement are simply isn't there.
All right, I guess I was trying to just gauge because we're giving 5 years, and so I'm trying to see how urgent is it really. But there are two specifics here that I remember when these changed years ago, that this created quite a ruckus in the schools, if I may use that word. Okay, so you have, for example, this ratio for hand washing units in each classroom or adjacent to. It's going to be now 1 per 50 students for below second grade, right? No. For all grade levels.
Yes,
okay.
all grade levels, yes.
Yeah, it used to be 1 per 100 students. And I remember this because the classrooms, for example, at MU Lohan had issues, and I don't know if they had to put in more sinks. I can't remember the remedy or how they remedied it, but they had to like reconfigure how many students they could put in a classroom because of the number of sinks. And I remember that being a very big deal for them at the time. But so this, for example, the number of hand washing units per student, you want to increase the number. I can see that would, keep things cleaner. That's a theory, but how urgent is that compliance with that?
Well, first, that standard was obtained from the International Plumbing Code. So we're trying to be consistent as well, try to increase the standards, meet the standards where we are currently. Hand washing, basic hand washing is the key to preventing transmission of disease because, hands are hands are usually the common vehicle for transmitting diseases, especially in a crowded situation, crowded facility like schools, especially among children, like an elementary school level. So we deliberately pursued the current standard of 1:50 ratio. I think it's going back, prevention. So that's why we recognize it's going to be a challenge for schools if they if they haven't already met it. So we give them 5 years, and I thought 5 years was rather generous.
It does seem generous. All right. What about, okay, so hand washing, I can understand that. What about the male bathrooms now going from what used to be 1 toilet per 100 students to 1 toilet per 50 students? What is the concern there? I mean, I guess, let me rephrase that. Schools are currently operating with these, 1 per 50, or 1 per 100, I'm sorry. And is there an issue that they are having with that number?
With the exception of the new schools, I think every GDOE has challenge with the number of facilities, toilet facilities, or functioning or operable toilets or urinals.
But functioning and operable, is that related to what we're talking about today?
Well, yes and no. Many times they're not able to meet the standards because it's broken or damaged. They may actually have the number of facilities required, but
Right.
it's damaged or it's not functioning for whatever reason, so they're not
Right,
able to
but
meet
let's say, of course, we want them to be operable, right? So 1 per 100, what is the problem that this is going to solve? Is it because there are long lines for the bathrooms and we need them to use, have more available? Or is this a plumbing code, what makes plumbing easier? I don't know. I'm not trying to be facetious, but
I understand.
yeah.
I perfectly understand, Senator. I do understand the question. This is going back to the same thing was the number of hand washing sink. It was trying to reach a standard where it's currently being enforced right now. So, let me tell you, requirement that's currently adopted right now, such as the International Plumbing Code. So we're just trying to be consistent. So that was our reasoning for that.
All right, okay, so I'm going to open it up to the panel. Senator Perez, if you have any questions?
I'm going through the regulations, and I can appreciate a lot of the detail, considering I taught at Simon Sanchez High School, so I see improvements are needed in our schools. I guess, my concern is the ability, considering a lot of our schools are behind on the CIP projects, capital improvement projects. Possibly a variance might be needed to extend if they're acting on good faith as far as making these changes. I know the value of the changes, the regulations. So I appreciate the regulations as is. I guess one question that I would have is there flexibility in the rules to allow for alternative schools? So something in Hawaii that they have is place-based education, where they teach at the beach side in regards to celestial navigation. Will there be any type of exemptions for schools that want to be more alternative in their approach to the curriculum?
The current regulations and the proposed regulations essentially treat all schools the same, Senator. If they're defined and meets the definition of a school, then they have to abide by the requirements of the proposal. I'm not sure, I can't say the current charter schools have met the requirements, so it's not that they're unable to. I'm not sure what type of schools that you have in mind, Senator. If they're defined as a school, then we expect them to meet the requirements as proposed in these regulations, in our current regulations as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the outdoor environment is different from an indoor environment. So if the school is taking place outdoors, let's say like a farm school, for instance, you know, the amount of space that's needed might vary.
Well, the curriculum, that may be a curriculum, but not actually be defined as a school building. This is a school building sanitation regulations. It's not a school curriculum or school program. So I don't believe that would be applicable to these regulations, Senator. I think this is talking about a structure where it's defined as a school that's meet the requirements. It sounds to me maybe you're talking about curriculum where they have, like maybe on a farm or on a marine lab, or someplace along the coast or something. That would not be applicable to this because that's not a school. That's more like a curriculum or program. I'm kind of guessing that's what we're discussing.
Well, I mean, the purview is that schools require sanitary permits. So I'm just
Yes.
wondering if there's going to be any kind of exemptions allowed for schools that have different configurations where it's more of an outdoor environment versus an indoor environment.
If they have a facility, then they have to meet the requirement. But if they do not, then I guess in theory they would not. Well, you know, that's a good point, Senator. But I think this is only applicable to a physical structure. If they have it, then they have to meet the standards of these requirements as a school.
The other thing is indoor air quality. Is that I don't see any section on that. I know mold is an issue in some of our buildings. Is that something that was addressed?
Yes, that is addressed indirectly through relative humidity, temperature, because mold will grow at ideally at a certain temperature and at certain relative humidity. So we took the standards which would basically would not promote the growth of mold in classrooms. Like I believe we're using the standard developed by ASHRAE, and it's less than 70% relative humidity and a temperature below 78. Yeah. Okay, 73, 78. So yes, we've addressed that indirectly. But then again, if you have mold growing, that's a violation.
Are there currently standards in place for indoor air quality?
Explicitly, you want to take that?
Indoor air quality is impacted by ventilation rate, temperature, and humidity. So those three parameters were included in the language of the regulations. So we believe by addressing those and those parameters, then the school environment would have a better indoor air quality, which is actually based on the standard of the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Engineers.
Are there protocols in place to actually test the indoor air quality as far as mold is concerned?
Well, specific to mold, there's no standards for mold. Everyone reacts differently to mold. Some are highly sensitive to it, others are not. There's no national or local standards for mold. But we recognize that it can aggravate asthmatics or those with other respiratory illnesses. So, as Leah has mentioned, we're addressing that through the environment, maintaining proper relative humidity, temperature, and ventilation.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Senator Marsh Tyson.
Hafaday, good to see you here again. And of course, this is a very important issue. Safety for our children and people that are attending school otherwise, young adults and adults, is very important, of course. One of the things that I wanted to understand better is, you said that one of the major changes was the size, the square footage per student for the playgrounds. What is the current square footage allotted or calculated for each student? Right now, I believe this updates it to 100 square feet per student. Do you know what the current regulations are and what the current situations are?
Okay. So the current regulations only state that there should be at least 1,000 square footage of playground area for the school, regardless of the number of students using that area in the, oh, 5,000? Okay, I'm sorry, my supervisor said it's 5,000. Okay, so 5,000, regardless of the number of students using that area. So of course, that would be a problem if there are more students, and that would result in collision and injuries. So we adopted the requirement of the Caring for Our Children standards, which is 100 square feet per student, using that area in a certain period. So it doesn't mean the entire school population. So for example, there's 50 students for that period. So we multiply that by 100, then we get the 5,000 square feet.
If it's helpful, all GDOE schools meet this requirement. In fact, they met this easily, the requirements. They do meet all the requirements.
I think she said 50. So, sorry, I had missed some of that. Did you say that all schools right now have 5,000 square feet?
All GDOE schools would meet this requirement if implemented.
Do you know if they exceeded? I'm trying to understand how hard it would be to comply with. If we have very large schools with hundreds, perhaps thousands of students that are there, if they're at 5,000 square feet, and that only accommodates 50 students at a time. So I'm trying to understand how difficult this would be for them to comply with.
It would not be difficult for them to comply with this at all.
Okay, so you
Right.
feel that there's enough square footage beyond the 5,000 square feet already?
Based on our previous inspections, our calculation, the enrollment of the school, they would easily meet those requirements.
Okay, so that part is good to understand. It's good to see that the room temperature is addressed. I've been in classrooms that were absolutely freezing, and I've been in classrooms that were incredibly warm. So having some consistency, and it impacts our students as they're trying to concentrate or do well in class. Having more consistency there is important. Can you discuss for me, so that we have a better understanding of the guidelines for time it can take or they are allotted to address issues? Are there any changes in these rules and regulations, such as a shorter period of time, a longer period of time, to address certain issues and get them back into compliance if they are found to be out of compliance? So if the room temperature, let's say, is not correct, are there guidelines here as to the
I
amount
see.
of time they have to get into compliance?
Okay.
And are there any changes?
No, that hasn't changed. Our inspection, because it's in statute, we're mandated how we're to do the inspection, how much time we should allot the establishment to correct the violations. For example, if they have critical violations, they have to correct it
It's
within
10 days.
10 days. It's also based on what grade they receive, letter grade. So that has not changed, and that will not change because that's currently addressed by statute. And our regulations, of course, to be consistent, uniform with the statute that's already in place.
Okay, and are you finding that they are able to comply fairly readily within those set of timelines that are already spelled out?
They meaning GDOE?
Yes.
I think I can best respond to that based on the last inspections we conducted of the 6 pilot schools that we had inspected as part of that program. Every one of them exceeded the minimum allowable demerit points, which means they received more than 40 demerit scores, which means they would all been suspended and their center permit pulled had we done the regular routine inspections. Now, a lot of them could be corrected on the spot, but it's not as simple as I'll correct this violation. The fact is they might have the same type of violation for every classroom. So maybe a single violation that's noted in the inspection report, it may be for all 100 classrooms. So to say that they're able to correct the violation was based on number of observations occurring in that school. Have GDOE been able to do them? Some they're able to fix on the spot, but a lot of them are structural issues that takes more time and effort. Those are the big challenges. Like I said, some of these schools are extremely old. I'm glad to hear Simon Sanchez is getting a new school, but George Washington High School during our last inspection had more violations, more observed violations than any other school. So it's not just Simon Sanchez that are in need of assistance.
Yes, and I've heard of some of those sort of issues, perhaps related to it being these schools being older. I'm not sure what all the issues are, but it seemed that many of the issues are chronic and perhaps have been difficult to deal with or cure, if you will, in that way. You note in the summary, in the testimony, in summarizing some of the substantial changes, and in number 2, you mentioned that the existing regulations require adequate ventilation, but that it does not define or explain what that would entail. And so just I want to point out, and maybe you have some helpful answers, in reading through the updated regulations dated October 2018, it still seems like a lot of that language is there that, like let's say on page 7, number 3, that there is adequate seating and lighting for for floor requirements, that number 3, that it be a satisfactory floor sealer. So without making the rules overly detailed and overly tedious, do you see areas there that could be tightened up to create some of that clarity like you've done for the ventilation?
Specifically to line 3, page 7 that you mentioned, that you referenced, about, or line 3 and 4, about adequate lighting. That's actually further explained in the lighting on page 11 and 12. So that actually is addressed. It's just that that was kind of in the general descriptive requirements, but it's more in detail going page 11 and 12. The other comment you mentioned about the adequate sealant, is that what it was?
Satisfactory floor
Satisfactory
sealer,
sealant?
but also the adequate ceiling, but
Yeah,
perhaps that's addressed.
Right.
So.
There's some things you just can't, I believe, can't put a standard or measurement, like whether it's like the ceiling or the that you just mentioned. But we did where we could, and if we did, we ensured it was a standard that's recognized nationally, or at least recognized within the industry. That's why we adopted some of the standards by American Society, as she said.
Right. So I noticed on page 18,
Page 18.
where the term adequate was there, but as you're saying, you tied it into a professional. An adequate type under safety A. Each school shall have an adequate type and number of first aid material as determined by the individual school's health care professionals. So
Correct.
I think that's a good practice, and perhaps there are some other areas. It's good to see that you've had an eye on trying to clarify where you can, but it'd just be good to see that if there are any other areas like that, that also be tightened down in the same way.
Understood.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that as is possible, that's addressed. I understand it's not easy to quantify
Certain things,
everything.
sure.
That becomes quite a larger set of regulations. So just ma'asi for your answers.
Thank you. Senator Moreland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to the compliance inspections, it's a similar situation like with the swimming pools,
Yes.
I suppose. Is there a checklist like the schools or these swimming pools would provide public health, say a semi-annual report saying I am complying to 1 through Z or A through Z, then maybe just a spot check every now and then. But if the establishment does submit to public health to say, yes, I am in compliance, and then up to you to confirm that. But if they're not in compliance, then basically they weren't telling the truth. Is there something that they currently do for that?
What we've done is we focus our inspections based on risk. So it's a form of risk management. We identify those type facilities that pose the greatest risk to the community. For example, if you cater your service primarily to those of high-risk populations, such as the young, the elderly, and the immunocompromised, then we put a lot of resources into that. So we prioritize in terms of number of inspection we do and how often we do them. So like cafeteria for elementary school, we inspect them more than, let's say, a high school cafeteria. We'll inspect like the contracted food service for the malamcos more often than we do it for, let's say, a small mom and pop operation. So it's all based on risk and trying to find that balance. But as I said many times, we're doing a horrible job of inspecting all the 3,000 plus health regulated establishments. So we're just doing by priority. And complaints, the public complaints have actually been helpful. In fact, in 2018, when we closed 40 health regulated establishments, most of them, nearly all of them, originated because of a public complaint. They happen to be the eyes and ears of environmental health. They help us focus our inspections because they've seen things that shouldn't be happening, and it's been confirmed during our inspections, whether it be rodent infestation or cockroach infestations. That's why I think it's important that whether they're categorized as high risk or not, all establishments should be inspected frequently, whether they're considered low priority or high priority, because some of these low priority establishments are the ones we end up closing because they're just not being inspected as often as they should be. I hope I was able to answer your question, Senator.
I was just thinking of for the schools, right? If I was the principal and I knew my requirements, knowing that you won't come see me unless somebody makes a complaint. But if I still provided you with a report saying I am in compliance, that's kind of giving me I really want to be in compliance just in case somebody takes a picture of it and says, hey, you weren't in compliance, But it kind of puts it back onto me, considering that, the public health it's difficult for you folks to get out there and inspect. But I'm also wondering, do you think that's something that should be outsourced, these inspections, since you have so much other things to be doing?
Right. That's been brought up before as to whether that should be our source or not, and as to whether we'll just end up becoming auditors of those inspections. Our position has always been whatever we can to further our cause, pursue our mission, and ensure prevention and protect the community. I'm all for it. But that means ensuring that the type of inspection we do, the quality inspection we do, and the qualification individuals that does these type of inspections should be the same what we do as our current permanent employees. There is one particular law that allows for that, and that's for temporary workforce housing. But once again, there has to be a funding for that to work as well. I mean, you contract these services, you have to pay money for them, and we supported it. But the reality is, there has to be a need, and there has to be the funding for it. And there's definitely a need, but the funding's never there.
Thank you very much. Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, I was trying to find, there was something on here in the report I was looking at that talked about 2008. Can you identify what that was in reference to?
2008.
I'm trying to find it, maybe.
Was that in our testimony?
Anyway, I was trying to lead to is that number one, you were with the department, you were doing inspection in 2008, correct?
Oh, that's during the AG task force, right? Oh, the Attorney General,
You were part of the group?
Yes, I was part of the group.
Yeah, I was the chairman of the Board of Education. I remember that. I
Yes,
remember
you
you
were,
well,
Senator.
Tom. And you know what concerns me is that it's 2008, it's now 2019, we're riding into 2020, and we're talking about proposal. And I remember when you guys closed schools, you had proposals to close 9 additional schools. We had to be faced with the predicament of the Board of Education. We terminated a superintendent because of that. Then all of a sudden, all the schools got fixed. And what concerns me is that as I'm looking at the response from DOE as you were proposing this in 2017, it's like, why didn't you include the new schools and all that? I mean, I just hate to say this, it's all the reasons why not to be in compliance. Even without the proposal, if they're in compliance, it makes it a lot easier and the cost would be less to impose the additional or the new requirements. Am I correct? If everybody was in compliance today, any new requirement would be cheaper today if they were in compliance today with the basic requirements. Am I correct or no? You're shaking your head. That
Could you
means
rephrase that again? I'll make sure I understood the question before I answer. You're asking whether the new requirements would...
No, if all the schools today in the Department of Education were in compliance today with the requirements, the proposed regulation
Oh, yes.
would be cheaper, correct?
Oh, yes, it wouldn't be that much more, because that mean they met the requirements for the existing regulations 100%.
Okay.
And GDOE has been able
I
to
just-
meet them, it's just that they can't maintain it.
Well, and that's the biggest issue I have. And, you know, as the oversight chair, and I know Senator Therese is on it with GMH and with public health, we got to get everybody in compliance. Not make the excuses why you can't do it, but come up with the reasons how you can do it. I mean, they shouldn't have to be threatened that public health is going to go and inspect. No,
Absolutely.
I know for a fact, DOE has a checklist from you folks.
Yes, they do.
They know exactly what you're going to be looking for. So for any one of them to say on that response, can you check this? Can you come up with a better excuse like say, we're asking for money from the legislature. We're asking the governor for money. We're looking for grants. Because I honestly believe that what you're proposing, thank God you're asking, you're giving them a 5-year break, a lot more than you're giving the swimming pools. Thank you. But I'm just wondering how effective that 5 years will be, or is that just an excuse to wait 5 years to be told you gotta shut down or whatever, you know, whatever the financial impact will be. And that's what I'm worried about, is that you give them the edge. If they can't even meet the current requirements, 5 years today is not gonna make any difference. And that's the only threat I have, and I think the people of Guam needs to understand. We need to get everybody to be in compliance. You got the checklist, do what you need to do. So if this proposal was passed, you got 5 years to get ready for the new requirements. The only thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is that you identified universities and colleges in the list on the cost, and I'd like to see that separated. Remove the university, because why? Just look at DOE like you would look at, just DOE, because then we got to identify charter schools, and that should be part of that package, but not the University of Guam and not GCC. That's the only thing I'd like to ask that it be changed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more follow-up. The number of inspectors that you currently have and versus the number that you meet a minimum and then the ideal world, I guess. Who's your inspectors? Do you got one guy, or how many do you have?
Well, we have 8 inspectors. Inspectors meaning we have 8 environmental public health officer who have been identified to do compliance inspections. However, they don't just do compliance inspection. They do the vector control. They also do consumer commodities, all the environmental health programs that within our purview. So it's not that I can dedicate all their work in just inspections. I wish I could, but that means there'll be no mosquito surveillance. There'll be no review of consumer commodities coming to the island. I mean, the recalls. I mean, it will just be doing just inspections. And fortunately, we don't have the luxury of doing just inspections.
Thank you very much. Senator Sinakis.
Just one more. Is it possible to get a federal grant, like everybody else seems to be getting grants to do a lot of their work that they should be doing? Is there any way you guys can get a grant May it be coming from DOE, like they did with the what's that, safety officers for the schools. Is there any way that you could apply, you folks can apply for a grant, and that through the U.S. Department of Education, they can provide you funding so you can help inspect and help fix their problems?
Senator, we looked into all sorts of grants. What grants are available for environmental health field, and it's not just for Guam, I mean, other jurisdictions as well, it's usually competitive, short-term, and just like it's money to, it's a seed money to start a program. We've asked GDOE whether they could utilize their existing fund to possibly hire an an inspector just to inspect their schools, the cafeterias. They did not respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nadeau, and all of you from Public Health, and thank you for your input and your willingness to answer all these questions today and offer your suggestions and recommendations. There being no further testimony, we will accept testimony until May 28. You may submit those to the Ada Plaza Center, Suite 207, 173 Aspinall Avenue, 96910, to the mailroom here at the Guam Congress Building, or to email at senatorterlajeguam@gmail.com. The hearing for these rules and regulations is hereby closed. Sizus Masi.